it's free speech week this week, so I'm here with Tom and Adam, and we're going to be discussing free speech. So, the first thing is, there are different social media rules versus different society rules. How do you feel about that?
Tom?
Well, in society, it's not socially acceptable to say certain things, like bad words. Don't say bad words, especially if they can consider a hate crime, because those are not good. But in social media, people say these words a lot, sometimes. I mean, they can't get in trouble. It's a thing called free speech. Free speech can be really bad sometimes, with such things as the KKK. They exist because of free speech, and that's pretty messed up. But then also good things kind of exist with free speech, and I think Adam would like to talk about that.
So basically, yeah, Tom's right. Because of freedom of speech, basically just legalizes people to have these hate groups such as the KKK or like white supremacist groups in general. Speaking of that, so a corporation has the freedom of speech, or this is kind of segueing into kind of some places that have freedom of speech and others that limit freedom of speech. And so basically a corporation does have the freedom of speech, while a government building doesn't really because they're monitored so heavily. What's your take on that, Tom?
Yeah, in a government building, you can't just go, oh, I want to punch someone in the face, and punch the president in the face, so you're going to punch the president. You would probably get fired and kicked out of that building. You can't have free speech there. But say you're in a corporation, and they're chill with it, you could say you want to punch anyone. I mean, I could punch Adam. Or I could punch Trump.
Well, you're saying you could, but you can say that you want to. You can't do it, though.
You can't say what you want to. You can't act on what you say. Because the second you act on what you say, or someone acts on what you say for someone else, that is not freedom of speech anymore. That is a legitimate crime.
Well, it's if it's immediate action.
Yeah.
Hate speech is still free speech. But if that speech incites immediate action, and by immediate, like right after, like saying like, hey, yo, everyone, just beat up this dude, then that's illegal. But if it was just in a general term, then it's still protected under the free speech.
Yeah, you can still say, hey, beat up those people, but maybe not right now. Do it just casually over time. And that's why free speech can be really bad in certain situations. Because there's just people who hate other people, and they'll use advantage of that to do what they want.
But it also brings about different viewpoints that people can build upon, such as, not doing that kind of stuff. It also, with freedom of speech, allows people to create books which may or may not be controversial, such as the Anarchist Cookbook, Mein Kampf, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, Catcher in the Rye, and To Kill a Mockingbird, which are all books that have been in the past were under question of being banned. What's your take on that, Tom?
Some of these books can be really bad. I mean, we shouldn't really be teaching people how to make bombs, about like talking about bad people, like discussing racism in such kind of like a lighter tone. Maybe, I don't really know about the rest of the books, but they might not be appropriate. So we might have to like limit who can get them, make sure that they're not gonna like do anything bad with them, like learn how to make bombs, because that's never good.
Even if it is still hate speech, though, would you still consider it to be protected under freedom of speech?
I mean, if it's not inciting violence, it's going to be protected under freedom of speech. So as long as it's not, hey, go hurt this person, I mean, there's technically nothing we can do about it.
For example, though, I know with the Anarchist Cookbook, there are some things in there. Obviously, it's the Anarchist Cookbook, so the whole thing is kind of about they want to overthrow the government, and here's some things you can do it with. But there are also some recipes in that that are dangerously inaccurate.
Yeah, and I think that could lead to like people getting hurt, people hurting others, people hurting people near them. It's just not a good thing. I mean, that book really shouldn't be allowed unless it's used for like something important, maybe like scientific studies or like mental studies. It could be used for that too.
If it's used in an educational sense, I see no problem with it. If you want to go out and purchase your own Huckleberry Finn book, I don't see a problem with it either. That also brings up the question of should books be banned in the first place? I personally believe that it really shouldn't, because that stifles creativity in other people, and also kind of erases the whole side of an argument, rather than letting it be argued about and having a controversy there.
I think definitely, yeah. Some books maybe need some like moderation. We shouldn't really ban things outright though, unless they are really bad, in which case they definitely should be banned.
In some places, books will be banned, but in other places they aren't. Such as, for example, from before, Mein Kampf will be banned in Germany, but it won't be banned in places such as, I know that Northern Ireland hasn't banned it, and I know that the U.S. hasn't banned it.
With this, different media that is under fire a lot is music, and in particular, rap music. An artist that is fairly well known, I like to say, Mr. Lil Pump. He's on the radio. What is he, like 18 now?
Yeah, he's 18.
And yeah, no, he started when he was 17. But he's 18 now, and his music isn't exactly the cleanest. But it brings up the question of censorship on radio and from music. And I believe that really censorship of music, again, kind of disrupts creativity and how the artists can actually express themselves. But because like what their whole message, if they have to like change like the certain words, and it really doesn't hit as hard as it should or how it was intended to hit.
I think definitely, I mean, if some things are very explicit, they should be censored. We don't want little kids hearing that, because that can always be bad. But I mean, if it's something like that doesn't really need to be censored, sometimes they censor things very unsensibly. Can't think of a good example right now, but there are some very dumb censorship sometimes.
There are such things such as the song Pumped Up Kicks. In the radio edit, they censored the word bullet and gun.
Yeah, that's kind of sad. But I mean, for some things like public radio, possibly. I mean, maybe that, but private radio, you're listening to yourself. I mean, there shouldn't really have to be a problem with that. There really doesn't need to censor some stuff.
You good, Adam?
So, in history, the freedom of speech was very important for movements such as the civil rights and women's rights. Excuse me. They basically were fighting for their freedom of speech and for basically having the equal rights for the civil rights movement for people of color, for women's rights, obviously women. And without the freedom of speech, they wouldn't have been able to do this with their protests or with their petitions.
But couldn't free speech also hurt them as well?
Yes, because people can, like we said before, this gave way to certain hate groups such as the KKK, white supremacists, all of those groups, and they basically spoke out against them. And since it was kind of in the time period, they had a bit more weight to what they were saying, although we know that it didn't go through.
Yeah, there's some pretty things that happen in the history. Freedom of speech, really useful. Help people protest, help people change stuff, change how countries have gone. I mean, I think it's definitely a good thing in some situations, But, you know, it can be a bad thing, like what Adam mentioned, hate speech, but I think there's always going to be conflicts. I mean, we're going to have to deal with them, and I think freedom of speech can also help us deal with those.
For example, there would also be things such as corporations where, for example, in the mid to later half of the 19th century, there was a bigger wave of Italian and Irish immigrants coming into the U.S., but there would be multiple signs everywhere that would say they wouldn't hire, for example, they wouldn't hire an Irish man or they wouldn't serve an Italian man.
I think some of that was pretty messed up. I mean, freedom of speech allowed them to do it. I think nowadays they probably won't be able to. With now, equality is much bigger. I mean, I think now you would get probably sued over it. But there are some cases where those lawsuits won't go through. I mean, because it is their freedom of speech. Some cases just doesn't work out.
Yeah, and a good modern case of that is the one that went to the Supreme Court about the gay couple asking for a custom cake from a Christian baker. What are your take on that?
I mean, he did offer them, what he basically did was he said that he wouldn't make a custom one, but he offered them any of his pre-made ones. But, you know, they took it to the Supreme Court, and the baker actually ended up winning that case because he did say that they could buy any of the other pre-made wedding cakes. But it also shows that the government shouldn't really force someone's opinion as it could have possibly done. And, yeah.
I think, you know, the government can't really, enforce that, oh, yeah, you have to do this. I mean, people are always going to try to break the law. They're always trying to do stuff. I mean, there's always going to be lawsuits over stuff. Sometimes, just, would it really be too much of a hassle to go to a different baker or just get one of the pre-made cakes? There's not really much difference to it. I mean, it's not that much work. If you have a problem with someone and they deny you the speech or the right to what you want, just go somewhere else. It's like cyberbullying. Just turn off your computer.
Oh, this one's big. Sometimes you have people who accuse other people of something, but they don't have any proof. And to hold up in a court of law, you need to have proof with your accusation, or else it just falls to the ground because there's nothing to back you up. You just have the claim. And some people will agree with you, some people won't. The more proof you have, the better your chances are. But again, if you don't have proof, your whole argument's going to fall through.
And another historical example of this is in the 1950s, the Chiquita Banana Company from South America, they came up to the U.S., and because they had land taken from them that was redistributed to other people in the country, they came up to the U.S., which was very phobic of communism at the time, went up to President Dwight D. Eisenhower and told him that the South American country that they were in was being run by a communist dictator. They didn't have very much proof of this, but because the U.S. heard the word communist, they came in and they destroyed the entire country's government.
There's also the reign of terror in France when you could basically just say, hey, this guy's a total monarch. They didn't ask, he'd be executed just because you said it.
Yeah, and in the USSR, if you even had ties to someone who kind of said something bad about Stalin or said something bad about communism, you could be executed or taken to a gulag.
There's also the issue of copyright. I mean, copyright and free speech, they kind of go together in some situations, kind of don't go together in others. But you can really argue that copyright really only applies to a few things. It applies to someone's intellectual property, what they've created. I mean, if you want to say something about that property, you can. If you're using it under fair use, you can criticize it all you want. But nowadays, people are manipulating that, messing with the system, using it to false copyright people, and that's not really working out. It's not really helping people. It's taking away people's money. It's a very much big problem on social media services like YouTube, and it's pretty bad. So, Adam, you have anything?
Well, again, like you said, copyright and free speech are sometimes together, sometimes not. When it comes down to should work be allowed to should work be allowed for others' creative products? As long as it's still under fair use and you acknowledge that it's not yours, such as giving credit, there shouldn't be a huge problem with it, unless it's just blatantly ripping it off with no credit.
And there's also a very modern equivalent that people can understand, which is, it can be joked about, but at the end of the day, it is kind of a copyright issue. When someone makes a meme online and they use something like a copyrighted image, then they're taking another person's intellectual property and they're using it without crediting anyone else. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that can definitely cause a lot of trouble. Like in the EU, they're definitely doing work on that, and now they've incited Article 13, which pretty much is if you're using a copyright image, it will get taken down. And it's causing a lot of trouble and a lot of fuss. And a lot of people in Britain are wanting Brexit now because it's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's always Brexit has always kind of been there since they voted on it before, but now they're really having a push for it because they don't really want to have to comply with Articles 11 and 13.
There's the problem of English is a difficult language. There's the problem with free speech eliminating civil debates, and basically it allows anyone to say whatever they want, whether it's aggressive or passive. And in the context of a civil debate, it's a civil argument, and basically, with the free speech, that argument can turn into a fight with people exchanging harsh words and such.
I could, for example, just say, Adam's a horrible person, eats kittens. My free speech allows me to do that. Sure, I have no proof, and that could incite a fight. But I mean, it's my freedom, right? So, I mean, that really probably needs to be changed. Changed in some way, that fights or something like that don't use like hate or intentionally mean things, and hate or take like targeted hate speech shouldn't really be freedom speech.
Yeah, that really brings about the question where it's if it's a debate and you're debating opinions and you start attacking the other person, is it still free speech anymore? Thoughts?
I mean, like we said with the hate speech, if it's targeted to a direct individual, it's not protected under the free speech. Therefore, it's a crime.
There's also another question, which is, should free speech be allowed in education? Such as, should teachers just be able to teach whatever they want instead of teaching the curriculum?
I think that can be a problem in some cases because teachers could use this to push their own agenda, like push their own political ideas or what they believe in on young, impressionable students. But in some cases, it could be good with the teachers teaching them new opinions or things different from what they already know or what are learning in school.
If it were to be, allowed to have the free speech in education, I feel like it does have a good side to it, as in bringing about a new perspective that some people might have not realized. And it's their choice whether they agree with it or not. So if you take into account a religious belief against a regular scientific belief, it's basically it just brings the idea. Now, the child doesn't have to agree with it, but since it is a child, it has the ability to kind of, twist the opinion of the child, as they're still very as they can be manipulated very easily.
And then there's also the age-old question, which is different parts of free speech and journalism with what's been coming about lately with fake news and how if you report the truth, sometimes you can lose your money. Sometimes you can lose money, and you can even lose your job at some points.
I mean, yeah, fake news, it's always going to be a problem. People are always going to lie to get money and attention. But I think that steps over the line when that fake news is starting to hurt people by causing them their jobs, their money. I mean, that's not very good for anyone. So I think it should be definitely, like, lies should be stopped or limited because they're hurting people.
I feel like the ultimate, like, overall lesson from this is without free speech, you have the inability to put ideas out, which can limit not only your creativity, but it can limit your life, such as you can't make a change in the world. And, like, for example, back in the USSR, you wouldn't be able to say what you wanted to, because then you would be either executed on the spot or you'd be put in a gulag. And so you never had the ability to change unless you wanted to have something like a revolution, which you'd need free speech to tell other people to have that. Any closing points?
No.
So that wraps up our segment about free speech. What are your opinions on it?